Rain hammered against the windows of the brownstone apartment on the corner of Atlantic and Court at 11:47 on a Saturday night. Jessica Jones, dressed in worn sweatpants and an oversized Columbia Law hoodie with her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, was about to close her laptop and collapse into bed when three sleek black Mercedes sedans glided to a stop directly in front of her building. Her pulse spiked. Her hand instinctively reached for the pepper spray she kept in her desk drawer. No one rolled up in a convoy like that at midnight, not unless they were connected. 3 years earlier, she had been a rising star at Morrison & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious corporate investigation firms. She had uncovered a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme involving senior executives. They had destroyed her career for it. Wrongful termination, blacklisted across the industry, painted as unstable and vindictive. Now she lived with mounting legal bills from her lawsuit, rejection letters, and freelance work that barely covered rent. Jessica had gotten used to stress. She lived with it every day. But tonight, something felt different. A car door opened. A tall man in an impeccably tailored black suit stepped out onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. Not a hired muscle. This man moved with the kind of authority that made entire rooms fall silent. Even through the distortion of rain on glass, Jessica could see the weariness etched into his features. Dark hair swept back from a striking face, intense eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. A distinctive tattoo curling up from his collar along the side of his neck, partially hidden by the crisp white shirt. And that expression, the expression of someone who had learned long ago that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. He walked toward the entrance with purposeful, measured strides. Two men in dark suits flanked him at a respectful distance. The intercom buzzed. Jessica's breath caught. "Jessica Jones?" His voice crackled through the speaker, low and commanding, more accustomed to issuing directives than making requests. Jessica pressed the button, keeping her voice steady. "Who's asking? This is private property. My name is Enzo Romano. I need 5 minutes of your time. It's a matter of life and death. Please stay with me till the end of this story. You will love it. Like and share this video so that others can see it. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do so. You don't miss the next interesting story." Jessica gestured toward the worn couch, but Enzo remained standing, pacing the narrow space between her coffee table and the bookshelf crammed with law textbooks and case files. He moved like a caged predator, all controlled energy and barely restrained tension. "My father built the Romano family into what it is today over 40 years, Enzo began, his voice low and measured. When he died last year, he left a provision in his will. Any Don who remains unmarried past the age of 35 must face a commission review. He believed marriage ensured stability, legacy, commitment to the family's future. I turn 36 in 3 months. Marco has been waiting for this moment since the funeral." Jessica leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "And the commission just goes along with this?" "The commission respects tradition above all else. Marco has spent 6 months convincing them I'm a liability, too violent, too unpredictable, too willing to go to war with the other families. He's painted himself as the reasonable alternative, the diplomat who can bring peace to the territories." Enzo's jaw tightened. What they don't know is that Marco has been orchestrating conflicts, provoking confrontations, making me look exactly like the monster he claims I am. "So marry someone from your world. There must be hundreds of women who would." Marco has gotten to all of them. Threats, bribes, leverage. Every eligible woman in the 5 families is either his ally or too terrified to cross him. I've run out of options and time. The commission meets at dawn. If I show up unmarried, I'm dead by noon. Jessica studied him carefully, her investigator instincts passing every word, every micro-expression. "You're asking me to walk into the lion's den with you? To face men who kill people for sport? To lie convincingly enough that they don't execute both of us for the insult?" Yes. The simple honesty of it caught her off guard. No platitudes, no false reassurances, just the brutal truth. And what happens after 6 months? Jessica asked. When your power is consolidated and you don't need me anymore? Enzo finally stopped pacing, turning to face her directly. You walk away with enough money to rebuild your career 10 times over and connections that will ensure no one ever blacklists you again. Clean divorce, no strings attached. You'll have more leverage over me than any woman I've ever known. Jessica pushed off the counter, closing the distance between them until they were barely 3 feet apart. Here's what's going to happen if I agree to this insanity. You don't just marry me and parade me in front of your commission. You prove to me that you're worth saving. You move into this apartment. No entourage, no bodyguards sleeping in the hallway, no private chefs. You live like a normal person. You get a real job at one of your legitimate businesses, and you show up every day like everyone else. You take the subway, you do your own laundry, you experience the world the rest of us live in. Enzo's eyes narrowed. You want to humiliate me. I want to test you, Jessica corrected sharply. Because if you can't survive 6 months of ordinary life, if you can't function without your power and your weapons and your army of yes men, then you're exactly the liability Marco says you are. And I won't be the woman who helped a tyrant keep his throne. Silence stretched between them, heavy with challenge and calculation. Enzo's expressions cycled through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been grudging respect. 6 months, he finally said. Your apartment, a legitimate job. No exceptions. No exceptions, Jessica confirmed. And if you break the terms, I walk, commission or no commission. Enzo extended his hand, and this time when Jessica took it, the handshake felt less like a business transaction and more like a declaration of war. Then we have an agreement, Mrs. Romano. Not yet, Jessica said, a grim smile touching her lips. First, you have to survive meeting my terms. Then, you can call me your wife. 20 minutes later, a silver-haired man in an immaculate charcoal suit appeared at Jessica's door, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He introduced himself as Vincent Castellano, legal counsel to the Romano family, and his handshake was surprisingly warm despite the circumstances. Miss Jones, I understand we're working under unusual time constraints, Vincent said, settling into her desk chair and opening the briefcase with practiced efficiency. I've prepared a standard marriage contract with provisions for— Nothing about this is standard, Jessica interrupted, pulling up a chair beside him. I want to see every clause before anything gets signed. Vincent glanced at Enzo, who had taken up residence by the window, watching the street below. Enzo nodded once. Show her everything. For the next hour, Jessica's apartment transformed into an impromptu law office. Vincent spread documents across her small dining table while she read through each page with the meticulous attention to detail that had made her a formidable investigator. Enzo remained silent, a dark presence in the periphery, occasionally checking his phone as the hours ticked toward dawn. This clause here, Jessica said, tapping a paragraph midway through the contract. It says I'm required to reside at the Romano estate for the duration of the marriage. That's not going to work. Vincent adjusted his reading glasses. The commission will expect the Don's wife to maintain appropriate— The commission will expect a marriage, Jessica cut him off. They didn't specify where we live. Enzo moves into this apartment. Non-negotiable. Miss Jones, the security concerns alone are Enzo's problem to solve within the parameters I've set, Jessica said firmly. She turned to face Enzo. You agreed to my terms, all of them. Enzo's expression remained unreadable, but after a long moment he spoke. Change it. The apartment becomes our primary residence. Vincent's pen scratched across the document. Jessica returned her attention to the contract, flipping to the financial section. This compensation structure is inadequate. I want my lawsuit settled in full within 30 days, not 90. I want a separate bank account in my name, only, with monthly deposits that I control. And I want a clause that guarantees if this marriage ends for any reason, other than my breach of contract, I receive a one-time payment of $500,000. That's quite substantial, Vincent observed mildly. So is the risk I'm taking, Jessica replied without hesitation. I'm putting my life on the line for your Don. I want insurance that if Marco succeeds in killing him, or if this entire arrangement falls apart, I'm not left with nothing. Enzo moved from the window, coming to stand at the edge of the table. Add it. All of it. Vincent made notes, his expression carefully neutral. And the duration? The standard family contracts run 3 years minimum. 6 months, Jessica said immediately, with an option to extend by mutual consent, but either party can terminate with 30 days' notice after the initial period. The Commission may view a 6-month marriage as suspicious, Vincent warned. Then Enzo will have to be very convincing about how madly in love we are, Jessica said dryly. She turned to another section. This clause about conjugal rights needs to be struck entirely. Separate bedrooms, separate lives, no physical expectations of any kind. Agreed, Enzo said before Vincent could respond. Make it explicit. This is a business arrangement. Jessica looked up at him, surprised by how quickly he'd conceded that point. Their eyes met across the table and something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or at least a mutual acknowledgement of boundaries. Vincent worked through the amendments with professional detachment, redrafting clauses and adding provisions as Jessica dictated them. She demanded transparency in all financial matters, the right to maintain her own career and clients, and a clause preventing Enzo from involving her in any illegal activities. You're building a fortress in legal language, Vincent observed as he printed the final version on Jessica's ancient printer. I'm protecting myself, Jessica corrected, scanning the revised contract one last time, because I don't trust easily and I won't be anyone's pawn. Enzo took the pen Vincent offered, signing his name with swift, decisive strokes. Then he slid the document across to Jessica. She hesitated only a moment before signing, Jessica Marie Jones. The ink felt permanent, irreversible, like stepping off a cliff and hoping someone had built a bridge halfway down. Congratulations, Vincent said, gathering the papers. Now we just need to make it official before the sun comes up. Judge Martin Brennan arrived at 2:47 a.m., looking like a man who'd received a phone call he couldn't refuse. His hands trembled slightly as he set his briefcase on Jessica's coffee table, and he wouldn't quite meet Enzo's eyes. Jessica recognized the signs of someone caught in the Romano family's orbit, bound by favors and fear in equal measure. 2 of Enzo's men positioned themselves by the door and window, their presence transforming her modest living room into something that felt more like a tribunal than a wedding venue. Jessica excused herself to change, retreating to her bedroom while the men made awkward small talk in hushed voices. She stood in front of her closet, staring at the limited options. The navy dress she'd worn to depositions and client meetings hung slightly wrinkled on its hanger. It was professional, modest, entirely inappropriate for a wedding. But then again, nothing about this night was appropriate. She slipped it on, ran a brush through her hair, and applied minimal makeup with hands that weren't quite steady. When she returned to the living room, Enzo had removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. The gesture made him look almost human, less like a Mafia boss, and more like a tired man at the end of a very long day. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, Jessica saw something vulnerable flicker across his face before the mask of control slid back into place. Shall we begin? Judge Brennan's voice cracked slightly on the last word. They stood facing each other in the space between her couch and the bookshelf, with Vincent and one of Enzo's men serving as witnesses. The judge opened a small, worn book, cleared his throat, and began reading the standard marriage ceremony in a monotone that stripped away any pretense of romance or celebration. Jessica barely heard the words. She was too focused on Enzo's face, trying to read the man behind the reputation. Up close, she could see the faint scar that ran along his jawline, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that suggested he carried the weight of his entire world and didn't know how to set it down. Do you, Enzo Michael Romano, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was steady, businesslike, devoid of emotion. And do you, Jessica Marie Jones, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? This was it, the point of no return. Jessica thought of her destroyed career, her mounting debts, the 3 years of struggling just to survive. She thought of the legal fortress she'd built into their contract, the escape clauses and protections. She thought of the impossible gamble she was taking on a man she'd known for less than 3 hours. I do. The words tasted strange on her tongue, both hollow and somehow irrevocable. Judge Brennan produced 2 simple gold bands from his pocket, clearly purchased in haste from some all-night jewelry store. Enzo took Jessica's left hand, his touch surprisingly gentle, and slid the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too loose. She returned the gesture, her fingers brushing against his calloused palm as she placed the band on his hand. It fit perfectly, as if he'd worn rings there before. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Judge Brennan closed his book with an audible snap. He didn't say the part about kissing. Perhaps he understood that some weddings were built on necessity rather than love. Vincent stepped forward with the marriage certificate, and Jessica watched as Enzo signed his name with the same decisive strokes he'd used on the contract. She added her own signature, and just like that, Jessica Jones became Jessica Romano. The judge left immediately, practically fleeing down the stairs. Vincent gathered the documents with professional efficiency, promised to file everything with the city clerk first thing in the morning, and departed with quiet congratulations that felt more like condolences. Then it was just Jessica and Enzo, standing in her living room at 3:17 a.m., married to each other and feeling like strangers. The commission convenes at 7, Enzo said finally, breaking the silence. We should leave by 6:30. Jessica nodded, suddenly exhausted. I'll set an alarm. Jessica. He said her name carefully, as if testing how it felt. Thank you. She met his eyes, seeing genuine gratitude there beneath the layers of control. Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive the morning. The Valentino estate sat behind iron gates in Westchester, a sprawling Georgian mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from a different century. As the Mercedes wound up the tree-lined driveway, Jessica felt her investigator instincts sharpening. She'd researched places like this during cases, but she'd never actually entered one. The wealth here wasn't new money flash. It was old power that didn't need to announce itself. Enzo sat beside her in the back seat, perfectly still except for his thumb tapping an irregular rhythm against his knee. He'd changed into a fresh suit, every inch the Don again, but Jessica could see the tension coiled beneath the surface. This was his trial, and they both knew it. Remember, he said quietly as the car stopped, speak only when directly addressed. Answer honestly, but carefully. These men can smell lies the way sharks smell blood. I'm an investigator, Jessica replied, smoothing her dress. I know how to handle interrogations. This isn't an interrogation. Enzo's eyes met hers. It's a judgment. 2 men in dark suits opened the mansion's front doors. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast amber light across marble floors and oil paintings that probably cost more than Jessica's entire apartment building. A younger man, sharply dressed with cold eyes and a practiced smile, approached them in the foyer. Cousin, he said, the word dripping with false warmth. What a surprise. And you must be the bride. Marco, Enzo replied flatly. We're expected. Marco's gaze raked over Jessica with undisguised contempt. The commission is assembled in the library. I must say, Enzo, your taste in emergency solutions is quite unexpected. Jessica met his eyes without flinching. She'd dealt with men like Marco before, men who used charm as a weapon and mistook cruelty for strength. Unexpected works in my favor, she said coolly. No one sees me coming. Something dangerous flickered in Marco's expression before he turned and led them deeper into the mansion. They passed through corridors lined with family photographs and religious iconography, a strange blend of devotion and violence. Finally, Marco pushed open heavy wooden doors to reveal the library. 5 men sat in leather chairs arranged in a semicircle, like judges at a tribunal. They were older, weathered by decades of power and violence, their faces carved from experience and suspicion. The air smelled of cigar smoke and aged whiskey. This was the Commission, the ruling body that governed the 5 families, and every eye turned to assess Jessica with the weight of predators evaluating prey. "Gentlemen," Enzo said, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the circumstances, "I present my wife, Jessica Romano." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Jessica forced herself to stand straight, to meet their scrutiny without wavering. She recognized one of them from her research, Anthony Caruso, the eldest of the 5 Dons, a man rumored to have ordered more deaths than Jessica could count. "Your wife," Caruso finally spoke, his voice like gravel. "Married when, exactly?" 4 hours ago, Enzo replied. "The marriage certificate has been filed with the city clerk." "Convenient timing," this from a younger Don with steel-grey hair and a scar across his knuckles. "Some might say suspiciously convenient." "My father's will was explicit about the marriage provision," Enzo said. "I've fulfilled the requirement." "With a woman none of us have vetted." Marco stepped forward, positioning himself among the Commission members. "A woman with no family connections, no history with our organisation. For all we know, she could be law enforcement, a journalist, anyone with an agenda." "I'm a corporate investigator," Jessica said, her voice cutting through the room before Enzo could respond. All eyes snapped to her. "I was blacklisted 3 years ago for exposing executive fraud at my former employer. I have no love for authority figures who abuse their power, and I have even less patience for men who assume I'm either stupid or corrupt simply because I'm standing in this room." Caruso's eyebrows rose slightly. Beside her, Jessica felt Enzo's surprise, though he gave no outward sign of it. "Bold words," Caruso said. "But words are cheap. Why would a woman like you marry Enzo Romano in the middle of the night unless you were paid, threatened, or desperate?" Jessica met his gaze steadily. "All 3, actually. But mostly because he offered me something no one else has in 3 years. A chance to rebuild what powerful men destroyed, and in exchange I offered him something he couldn't find anywhere else. Someone who can't be bought by his enemies." The room fell silent again, but this time the quality of the silence had shifted. Jessica saw calculation in their eyes now, reassessment. She'd passed some invisible test, though she wasn't sure which one. Marco moved to the centre of the room, playing to his audience with the practiced ease of a performer who knew his stage. "Gentlemen, I ask you to consider the facts objectively. My cousin appears before us with a wife no one has met, married in the dead of night, conveniently hours before this hearing. Does this not strike anyone as theatrical, as desperate?" "Careful, Marco," Enzo said quietly, but there was steel beneath the words. "No, let him speak," Jessica interrupted, taking a step forward. "I want to hear what he's accusing me of." Marco turned to her with that cold smile. "I'm simply suggesting that a woman with nothing to her name, facing financial ruin and legal problems, might find it convenient to accept payment from a desperate man. A business transaction dressed up as a marriage. Perhaps you're an actress he hired. Perhaps you're simply an opportunist who saw a chance to escape your troubles." "You've done your homework," Jessica acknowledged. "Yes, I'm facing financial ruin. Yes, I have legal problems. But let me ask you something, Marco. If I were an actress, wouldn't Enzo have chosen someone more believable? Someone with family connections, someone the Commission would accept without question." She paused, letting the words sink in. Unless the point was exactly this, to choose someone so unlikely that the marriage couldn't be a calculated political move. Caruso leaned forward slightly, interest flickering in his ancient eyes. Jessica pressed on, her voice sharpening. "But more importantly, let's talk about why you're so invested in questioning this marriage. 6 months ago, before Enzo's father died, you were nothing more than a capo with ambitions. Now you're positioning yourself as the reasonable alternative, the diplomat who can bring peace. Tell me, Marco, who benefits most from declaring this marriage illegitimate? That's not— "You do," Jessica cut him off, and the room went dead silent. You inherit everything. The territories, the businesses, the power. So forgive me if I find your concern about the legitimacy of my marriage somewhat self-serving. Marco's facade cracked, anger bleeding through. You have no idea what you're talking about. You know nothing about this family, about our traditions, about what it means to lead. I know what it means to be betrayed by someone who's supposed to have your back, Jessica said, her voice dropping to something harder, more personal. I know what it's like when ambitious men decide you're an obstacle to their goals, and I know how to recognize a power play when I see one. She turned to address the commission directly. You're right to question this marriage. It is convenient. It is sudden. But ask yourselves this. If Enzo wanted to manipulate the situation, would he really choose someone like me? Someone with no connections, no leverage, no reason to protect him beyond a contract? Or would he choose exactly the kind of woman Marco is accusing me of being? Someone polished, connected, someone who knows how to play this game. And yet here you are, said the Don with the scarred knuckles, playing it quite well. I'm not playing anything, Jessica replied. I'm surviving. Same as I've been doing for 3 years. The only difference is now I've got a partner who's as much of an outsider in his own world as I am in mine. She glanced at Enzo, then back to the commission. You want to know if this marriage is real? It's as real as any marriage built on mutual need and honest terms. We're not in love. We're not pretending to be. But we are legally bound, and we are committed to making this work for 6 months. After that, you can judge whether Enzo Romano is fit to lead your families. Caruso studied her for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to Marco, whose face had gone rigid with barely controlled fury. I've heard enough. The marriage provision has been satisfied. The question now is whether we honor the Don's father's wishes or allow personal vendettas to override tradition. Personal vendettas, Marco started, but Caruso raised a weathered hand. A vote, all in favor of recognizing Enzo Romano's marriage and maintaining his position as Don of the Romano family. 4 hands rose. Only one remained down, the youngest Don, who avoided Marco's glare. The matter is settled, Caruso declared. Congratulations, Don Romano, and welcome to the family, Mrs. Romano. He fixed Jessica with a look that was equal parts warning and respect. I suspect you'll keep things interesting. Jessica felt Enzo's hand touch the small of her back, a brief gesture of solidarity and relief. They'd survived, for now. Enzo Romano stood on the cracked sidewalk outside Jessica's building at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, holding a single black leather suitcase. Behind him, 3 Mercedes idled at the curb, engines purring. His crew had followed him from the estate in Red Hook, a funeral procession for a man who wasn't dead yet. Boss! Tony Marcelli, his head of security, stepped forward with the careful tone of someone approaching a wounded animal. At least let us sweep the building. Install cameras. Something. Enzo didn't turn around. No. The commission just tried to remove you. Marco's still out there. You can't just... I said no. Enzo's voice carried the weight of final authority, the kind that had ended arguments and occasionally lives. This was the deal. Tony exchanged glances with the other men, their discomfort palpable. The idea of their Don living unprotected in a 4th-floor walk-up in Brooklyn was apparently more disturbing than any violence they'd witnessed in his service. Jessica appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, watching the scene with barely concealed amusement. She wore jeans and a faded NYU t-shirt, her hair still damp from the shower. The contrast between her casual morning routine and the armed men in $1,000 suits wasn't lost on anyone. You planning to stand out there all day, or are you coming up? She called down. Enzo picked up his suitcase and walked toward the entrance without looking back. The crew stood frozen, uncertain whether to follow, to object, to do something other than watch their boss disappear into a building with a broken mailbox and graffiti on the entrance. The apartment looked even smaller in daylight. Jessica had cleared space in the coat closet for his things, a gesture that felt simultaneously generous and pointed. One narrow closet for a man who owned a 10,000 square foot estate with walk-in rooms dedicated entirely to clothing. "Bathroom's through there," Jessica said, gesturing with her mug. "You get the cabinet under the sink. I get everything else. Toilet paper is under the vanity, and if you use the last of it without replacing the roll, we're getting divorced immediately." Enzo set his suitcase down carefully, scanning the space with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to identifying threats and exits. Outdated appliances. Thin walls that transmitted every sound from the neighbours. A single-window AC unit that wheezed asthmatically. The couch where he'd be sleeping looked barely long enough to accommodate his frame. "The sheets are in the hall closet," Jessica continued, moving into the kitchen. "Coffee's on if you want it. I leave for work at 8:15. You'll need to figure out your own schedule." Enzo watched her move through the apartment with efficient familiarity, already absorbed in her morning routine, treating his presence like a roommate rather than a husband or a mob boss. The dismissiveness should have irritated him. Instead, he found it oddly refreshing. "Thank you," he said quietly. Jessica paused, surprised. "For what?" "For not making this harder than it already is." She studied him for a moment, something softening in her expression. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't tried to use the shower during rush hour." That night, Enzo lay on the too-short couch in the dark, listening to the foreign sounds of a Brooklyn apartment building. Footsteps overhead, sirens in the distance, Jessica's quiet breathing from behind the closed bedroom door. For the first time in 20 years, Enzo Romano had no guards outside his door, no weapons within reach, no fortress walls between himself and the world. He didn't sleep. Enzo's first day at Romano Logistics and Import started with a name tag, not engraved, not embossed on expensive cardstock. A plastic badge with Enzo, new hire, printed in generic sans serif font dangling from a flimsy lanyard. Jessica had watched him clip it to his shirt that morning with the kind of careful control that suggested he was handling a live grenade. She'd said nothing, just handed him a travel mug of coffee and a brown bag lunch she'd packed the night before. The gesture had been practical, not affectionate, but Enzo had stared at that lunch bag for a full 30 seconds before taking it. Now, 2 weeks into his new role as a logistics coordinator, Jessica could see the toll it was taking. He came home each evening with the rigid posture of someone holding himself together through sheer force of will, tie loosened, dress shirt wrinkled from hours in a climate-controlled warehouse office. Tonight he arrived at 6:43, later than usual. Jessica looked up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing case files for a potential consulting gig. "Bad day?" Enzo set his messenger bag down with deliberate care. "I spent 4 hours in a meeting about shipping container optimization protocols. 4 hours. We could have made the decision in 10 minutes. Welcome to corporate America." Jessica closed her laptop. "Let me guess. Your supervisor wanted everyone's input, went around the table 3 times, then made the exact decision you suggested in the first 5 minutes. His name is Brandon. He's 25. He called me Buddy and asked if I was vibing with the team's synergy." Enzo's voice remained perfectly level, but Jessica caught the muscle twitching in his jaw. "I have killed men for less offensive language. You can't kill Brandon." "I'm aware." He loosened his tie completely, draping it over the back of a chair. "He also CC'd me on 17 emails today. 17. Most of them could have been resolved with a single phone call." Jessica tried and failed to suppress a smile. "You're getting the full experience. Did he ask you to circle back and touch base yet?" "Twice." Enzo moved to the kitchen, opening the refrigerator with the defeated air of a man reconsidering all his life choices. "And we have a mandatory team-building exercise next Friday. Something involving an escape room and fostering collaborative problem-solving skills." "An escape room?" Jessica's smile widened. The irony is almost poetic. Enzo turned to face her, and for a moment she saw past the frustration to something deeper. Exhaustion. the bone-deep weariness of a man fighting against every instinct he'd spent decades honing. In his world, inefficiency was eliminated, disrespect was punished. Problems were solved with decisive action, not consensus building and stakeholder buy-in. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. "How do you work within systems designed to waste time and reward mediocrity?" Jessica considered the question seriously. Because the alternative is worse. Because playing by the rules, even stupid rules, means you keep your integrity. It means when you win, nobody can claim you cheated. She paused. And because sometimes the system isn't about efficiency. It's about making sure everyone has a voice. Even Brandon. Brandon's voice adds nothing of value. Maybe not. But you don't get to make that call anymore. That's the whole point. She stood, moving toward him. "This is what you signed up for, Enzo. Powerlessness, bureaucracy, the daily indignity of being treated like everyone else." He held her gaze. Something shifting behind those calculating eyes. "I'm beginning to understand why you demanded this." "Good." Jessica grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, handing him one. "Because tomorrow, Brandon's going to ask you to update the quarterly logistics spreadsheet using a color-coding system he invented, and you're going to do it with a smile." Enzo accepted the beer, the ghost of a real smile, finally breaking through. "You're enjoying this?" "Immensely." Jessica clinked her bottle against his. "Welcome to the real world, Romano. Population. Everyone who isn't you." They drank in comfortable silence, 2 people learning to exist in the uncomfortable space between their respective worlds, discovering that sometimes the greatest act of courage wasn't violence or defiance. It was simply showing up and doing the work, even when every instinct screamed to burn it all down. The takeout containers sat open on the coffee table at 11:30 on a Thursday night, remnants of kung pao chicken and lo mein cooling between them. Jessica had her feet tucked under her on one end of the couch. Enzo sat at the other, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The television played silently in the background, neither of them watching. "I found the embezzlement by accident," Jessica said, chopsticks suspended halfway to her mouth. "I was tracking invoice discrepancies for a routine audit. Small amounts at first, 50,000 here, 70,000 there. Then I started seeing the pattern." Enzo reached for another container, his movements economical and precise even in this domestic setting. "How much total?" 17 million over 3 years. Senior executives had created shell vendors, fake consultants, phantom projects. They'd built an entire secondary accounting system. She set her chopsticks down. "I documented everything, presented it to the managing partner with a full forensic breakdown. I thought I was doing the right thing. They fired you instead. Worse, they buried the evidence, paid off the executives quietly, and then painted me as mentally unstable. Said I'd fabricated the whole thing because I was passed over for promotion. They had lawyers, connections, a carefully crafted narrative." Jessica's voice remained steady, but Enzo caught the tension in her shoulders. 3 years of my life building a career, and they destroyed it in 3 weeks. Enzo was quiet for a moment, studying her with that unsettling intensity she was beginning to recognize as his way of truly listening. "You could have taken money to stay quiet. I'm certain they offered." "They did, substantial money." Jessica met his gaze. "I said no. Why?" "Because I'd know. Every time I cashed a check, every time I looked in the mirror, I'd know I'd been bought." She picked up her beer, took a long drink. "Some things aren't for sale." Enzo's expression shifted, something almost like recognition crossing his features. "Marco came to me 6 months before the commission meeting. He offered a partnership, equal power, shared territories, no confrontation. All I had to do was step aside as Don and let him take the public role while I handled operations in the background." "Why didn't you take it?" "Because he's my father's nephew, not his son. Because the Romano family built itself on blood and loyalty, not political maneuvering and backroom deals. Because—" Enzo stopped, the words catching. "Because my father died protecting the principle that family protects family." Marco wanted to turn us into just another criminal enterprise where everyone's loyalty goes to the highest bidder. Jessica heard what he wasn't saying, the parallel hanging unspoken between them. So you both chose principle over pragmatism and got destroyed for it. I'm not destroyed yet. But Enzo's smile was sardonic, self-aware. Though spending 45 minutes this afternoon explaining to Brandon why we can't ship refrigerated goods in non-refrigerated containers came close. Jessica laughed, genuine and unexpected. The sound seemed to surprise them both. God, we're a pair. The corporate investigator who couldn't stay bought and the mob boss who couldn't stay corrupt. Corrupted, Enzo corrected. I'm still fairly corrupt, just selectively so. That's not the defense you think it is. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that had started emerging over the past few weeks. The awkwardness of forced cohabitation had given way to something stranger and more unsettling. Actual companionship. Two people who understood what it meant to be punished for doing what they believed was right. They offered me 7 figures, Jessica said quietly, to disappear, to sign an NDA, and pretend none of it happened. How much did you have in your bank account when you refused? $4,000, and 3 months left on my lease. Enzo set down his beer, turned to face her fully. Then you're either incredibly principled or incredibly stupid. Can't I be both? For the first time since she'd met him, Enzo Romano laughed, really laughed. Not the sardonic half smile or the controlled amusement, but genuine, unguarded laughter. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less dangerous, almost approachable. Yes, he said finally. I suppose you can. I suppose we both can. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Inside, 2 people who'd survived betrayal by the institutions they'd trusted sat sharing cold Chinese food and hard-won honesty, discovering that sometimes the greatest luxury wasn't power or money. It was finding someone who understood the cost of keeping your integrity intact. The mugging happened on a Tuesday evening 3 blocks from the apartment. 2 men in hoodies, practiced and efficient, cornering Jessica in the alcove of a closed bodega. They took her bag, her phone, and left her with a split lip and a message delivered in a voice too controlled to belong to common street criminals. Tell your husband Marco sends his regards. Jessica stumbled home, adrenaline masking the pain, and found Enzo at the kitchen table reviewing shipping manifests. He was on his feet before she'd fully closed the door, his entire body shifting into something predatory and focused. Who? Not a question. A command. Jessica touched her bleeding lip, tasted copper. 2 men. They knew who I was. They mentioned Marco. The transformation was instantaneous. The mild-mannered logistics coordinator vanished, replaced by the Don she'd glimpsed only in moments of carefully controlled tension. Enzo pulled out his phone with movements that spoke of violence barely restrained. Don't! Jessica's voice cut through his fury. Don't make that call. They put their hands on you. That's exactly what he wants. You respond with violence. You prove to the commission that you haven't changed, that 6 months of playing civilian was just theatre. She moved to the sink, dampening a towel. Marco's not stupid. This is a test. Enzo's hand tightened around the phone. Then he's testing the wrong man. The threatening messages started arriving the next morning. Texts from unknown numbers, emails to her personal account, each one more specific than the last, references to her daily routine, her consulting clients, the coffee shop where she worked most afternoons. Someone was watching. Someone wanted her to know she was being watched. But it was the fraud allegation that cut deepest. Jessica's former employer, Morrison & Associates, filed a formal complaint with the New York State Bar Association, claiming she'd fabricated evidence in her embezzlement investigation. They had documents, emails with timestamps, testimony from colleagues who swore she'd been erratic, obsessive, willing to lie for attention. The evidence was expert-level fabrication. Someone with resources and connections had spent considerable time and money making her look guilty. Jessica sat in their apartment reviewing the complaint for the 3rd time, while Enzo paced like a caged animal. She could feel his rage radiating off him in waves, the careful civilian mask cracking with each circuit he made around the small living room. "I can end this with one phone call," he said finally. Marco disappears. The threats stop, the allegations vanish. "And then what?" Jessica looked up from the papers. "You become exactly what Marco's been telling everyone you are. A violent criminal who can't function outside his world of intimidation and murder." She stood, meeting his fury with her own steel. "This is what it means to live without power, Enzo. You can't just eliminate problems. You have to fight them the right way, even when it's harder, even when it takes longer. They're destroying you. They're trying to. There's a difference." Jessica moved closer, forcing him to focus on her instead of his rage. "I've been here before. I survived Morrison's first attack on my credibility. I'll survive this one. But I need to do it legally, through proper channels, by proving they're lying. And if you can't, then I lose. But I lose on my terms, Benti, not because my husband murdered his way out of a problem." She touched his arm, felt the tension vibrating through him. "You promised me 6 months of being normal, of proving you're more than violence and fear. This is that test. Right now, today." Enzo stared at her, and Jessica watched the war playing out behind those dark eyes. Every instinct he possessed screamed for blood, for retribution, for the swift and brutal justice that had defined his entire adult life. She was asking him to be powerless in the face of a direct attack on someone under his protection. She was asking him to be something he'd never been. Ordinary. "Tell me what you need," he said finally, the words costing him everything. Jessica exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. "A lawyer. A good one. Someone who specializes in bar association defenses and has no connection to your family." She picked up her laptop. "And time. This gets fought the boring way. Documents, depositions, procedural motions." Enzo nodded slowly, pulling out his phone. But this time when he made the call, it wasn't to his consigliere or his security chief. It was to a legitimate attorney Jessica had vetted herself. Outside, Marco's surveillance team watched and waited, expecting violence that wouldn't come, underestimating the most dangerous thing Enzo Romano had ever done. Absolutely nothing.